What's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today we're talking about the Dallas Mavericks, who yesterday had a really rough L to the Charlotte Hornets, an actively tanking Charlotte team at that. They've been one of the worst teams in the NBA the entire season. LaMelo Ball is out for the season with a fractured ankle. They're actively sitting some of their other players. They're rotating their really young guys in and out of the rotation. It's what a team like Charlotte should be doing at this point in the season. But for Dallas, they're trying to go for playoff positioning, so these aren't games that you can afford to lose. But it's okay. You know, every team in the history of the sport has had one or two bad losses on the season. It's very rare that teams don't. It's not like they lost back-to-back games to the Charlotte Hornets or anything like that, especially not losing one in Dallas itself. Except that they did. They've now lost their last two games to the Charlotte Hornets. Two games that felt like automatic wins for a Mavericks team that continues to reel. Right now, they're sitting at 36-39 on the season, one full game back of the Thunder and Lakers, who are tied at the 9 and 10 spots, meaning that right now, if the season ended today, the Dallas Mavericks, who last year were in the Western Conference Finals, would even make the play-in tournament, never mind the playoffs. And this is a team that has Luka Doncic, arguably a top 5 player in the league today, a generational type talent that should probably be competing for his first or even second MVP at this point if they could just put a competent roster around him. But instead, they've been incredibly disappointing, arguably the most disappointing team in the entire NBA this season. This disappointment has been a theme the entire year, but as of late, it's gotten much, much worse. At the All-Star break, they're 31-29, good for 6th in the Western Conference. They're just a game behind the Clippers in 5th and 1.5 games away from the Suns in 4th place. And just a few days earlier, they had been in that 4 spot, so it felt realistic that the Mavericks were going to be right there between the 4, the 6 spots, maybe down to the 7 because the Western Conference is so close. But I feel like they were probably going to jockey between those positions for the rest of the season to figure out who they faced off against in the first round of the playoffs. However, instead, since the All-Star break, they're 5-10. That's the 6th worst record over that span, only ahead of teams like the Pistons, Blazers, Rockets, Wizards, and Spurs, who have all been god-awful over this recent stretch. This has led to a lot of outcry from Mavericks fans, in particular the ones attending the games, because during their Hornets loss, Mavericks fans started audibly booing, and I don't blame them because this team is bad, but it's causing even more friction, it feels like, amongst the players on this team. Kyrie, in his post-game press conference, was saying if they want to boo, they can try and come out here and win games. They don't know what it's like to be in this position of a player, which, yeah, I guess so, but at the same time, that doesn't excuse the poor performance. Luka Doncic is saying he's not really having fun playing basketball, and he did note that part of that is because of personal reasons, so hopefully everything's okay there. But it did seem like the fact that the Mavericks have been really bad is playing a big factor into that disappointment. You've also got ESPN's Tim McMahon saying earlier today, as I'm recording this video, that apparently when asked about what the situation is like in the locker room, he said, sound the damn alarm. And he sounded very urgent that this thing is falling apart at the seams every single second. Now, their upcoming schedule is relatively easy, so theoretically they should still probably make the play-in tournament or at least be in that conversation. But with the way that they've been playing recently, I mean, like I said, they lost back-to-back games to the Charlotte Hornets. No win feels automatic for the Mavericks at this point. There are a lot of young teams that they can face off against who could look at this opportunity and revel in the chance to play spoiler. They could look, if you're playing a bunch of young guys who may not have guaranteed contracts, they're going to be hungry to try and win these games. Nothing is guaranteed in the current NBA with all the parity, so there's a real chance that this Mavericks team outright misses the play-in tournament. Obviously, this would be a complete disaster and a really bad omen for the future, because the future doesn't look really bright for the Mavericks with the way things are currently going, and we'll talk about that more at the end of the video. But for now, let's talk about what went wrong on this season itself. Now, if you ask most people, they will say that the Kyrie Irving trade is the moment where everything went wrong for this team. Sure, they weren't great before the deal, but they're at least hovering above 500. When the Kyrie trade happened on February 6th, it set the NBA world on fire for a number of reasons. Obviously, it broke up the Kyrie-KD duo, one that had come to Brooklyn a few years ago looking for multiple titles. They didn't win a single one. They won a single playoff series and everything fell apart. It also signaled a potential KD trade coming up, which did end up happening, him going to Phoenix a few days later. But in particular, it signaled the first All-Star caliber player that Luka was ever going to have the chance to play with. And this was after me and many other people, basically anybody who watches the NBA, was saying, get Luka some help. He needs a better teammate. He needs a better supporting cast. So getting him a player like Kyrie, in theory, is a good idea. Giving him an all-star alongside him in the backcourt, someone that could take some of that offensive pressure off of him, give the team another ball handler, so it didn't just basically all lie on Luka and the shooters around him. In theory, it made sense, and for that reason, I like the idea of the trade, and I made a video the day that the trade happened saying I liked it, but I had a caveat also in that video. I said that I needed the Mavericks to do more than just this deal for them to truly win in this deal, because they gave away Dorian Finney-Smith, who's one of their better wing defenders, and now with Kyrie and Luka in the backcourt without any great stoppers around them, the defense seemed to be a major issue. While the offensive potential was extraordinary, they didn't seem like they're going to be able to get any form of consistent stop. So I said that I was hoping they would trade for some defenders around these guys at the deadline, and I felt like they would at least make one more deal. But they didn't. They didn't make a single other trade the rest of the deadline. They just stood pat with what they had, despite the defense being an issue all year and it actively getting worse. The only thing they did was bring in Justin Holiday, who sure gives them a bit more offensive firepower, but that was never the problem. So naturally, since the trade, the defense has been basically non-existent. Over that stretch, they're the 22nd defense in the entire NBA, and in games with Kyrie and Luka playing, the Mavericks have a defensive rating of 118.6, which would be the third worst in the NBA if you put that over the course of an entire season. I just don't know how the Mavericks didn't realize that this was going to be a major issue. Maybe they thought the offense could overcome it, and sure, the offense has been solid. It's had a 115.2 offensive rating in games with Kyrie and Luka playing, but that would be just tied for 10th on the season with the Portland Trail Blazers. And that's fine, but if you're going to sacrifice basically all your defense and bring in Kyrie Irving, you were probably hoping to be one of the best offenses in the league, like a top 5, top 3 offense, which seemed possible, but it hasn't been the case. So you combine a 22nd ranked defense with a barely top 10 offense, you're not going to win very many games in a very competitive Western Conference. So yes, I do think the Kyrie trade set them up for failure, but I don't believe that it's Kyrie's fault that the deal is failing, because he himself has been really good since he got to Dallas. He's averaging 27 points per game, 5.3 rebounds, and 5.9 assists on 49.5% shooting from the field, 38.7% from 3, and 93.6% from the line. He's been really good, and Luka in games alongside Kyrie is also playing very well. He's averaging 31.5 points per game, 8.5 rebounds, and 7.1 assists. It looks good. The duo is doing really well alongside each other. Now, there are some games where each of them are a bit inefficient. They're still definitely figuring out the chemistry-wise thing. Luka is still learning to play off ball because he's never really had to do it at this capacity. Kyrie has done it many times. He played alongside LeBron, KD, James Harden. This isn't the first time that Kyrie has had to kind of be an off-ball player, but Luka's still figuring it out. And it's understandable to expect there to be growing pains between these two, but it feels like they've both been kind of fine. Like, they're playing really, really well individually. Of course, the team success isn't there, but I really don't think it's their fault. This brings me to my biggest issue with this Mavericks team, and that is the supporting cast. It's just not very good. I mean, when you've got two defensively flawed guards like Kyrie and Luka, you have to have high-level defenders around them, and they just don't have really any of those anywhere on the roster. Reggie Bullock and Josh Reed are fine. They have some moments, but they're not going to prevent all the defensive woes of the two guys at the 1 and 2 spot. Down low, Dwight Powell is not a high-level rim protector or a high-level defender whatsoever, and he's not going to be able to constantly clean up the mistakes of guys that get by those other players on the perimeter. He can't do all that. Maxi Kleber isn't exactly a better answer either. You look at the bench, Christian Wood isn't a good defender. JaVale McGee, who I thought was a great signing, has not been good at all this season. Tim Hardaway Jr. is not going to get you any stops. Jaden Hardy has given them good minutes offensively, but defensively, he doesn't stand a chance. So they have some bad to med defenders. They have a couple of decent ones, but not a single elite lockdown guy. You can't build a defense around that. You can't win a championship with that setup. It's never going to work. Sure, you can overcome some of those issues with a high-level offense, which maybe they get to next season as this duo continues to build chemistry. But if you can't get any stops, it's never going to work in the playoffs. They just don't really stand much of a chance. Additionally, the shooters surrounding Luka and Kyrie are wildly inconsistent. There are some nights where you'll see Reggie Bullock knock down like 6 of 8 threes, and Tim Hardaway Jr. puts up like 28 points on 5 of 9 shooting or something from 3. They can have nights like that where everybody explodes and they look basically unstoppable. But on the contrary, there are a lot of nights where you've got multiple guys that are 1 of 6, 1 for 9, 0 for 8, like these crazy low numbers. And those are the nights where you see a box score and it's Luka with like 40, 10, 13. Kyrie has like 28, 7, and 9. And the rest of the guys on the roster have like 9 points, 6 points, 5 points. It's hard to have substantial success with this much variance. You have to have some more consistent guys on the roster, but they just don't have that right now. And the final nail in the coffin for this team is that I don't think Jason Kidd is a very good coach. I don't think he was great in Milwaukee. Milwaukee, I didn't like the idea of bringing him in to coach Luka and the squad that they had. Sure, they went to the Western Conference Finals, and I'm sure some people are going to say that I'm wrong about this coaching because of that, but I don't think that was much of his doing, a lot more of just Luka and high-level variance in terms of their shooting. So things don't feel like they're going to get better this season. Maybe they make the play-in and end up making the playoffs by winning a couple games. I mean, Kyrie and Luka have both had amazing playoff moments, but even then, they're nowhere near a championship contender. They're going to get destroyed against whatever top seed they play. So this season is pretty much washed. They really don't have a chance of doing anything substantial this year. So we look to the offseason, and I do believe that this duo can still work if they make the right moves in the offseason, but I don't really trust Dallas to do so. This is partially because they've had years to build a competent supporting cast around Luka, and it hasn't exactly worked, but also because I feel like there are a lot of flaws on this roster that are really hard to fill. Obviously, they need defensive stoppers. They need some elite level guys that can make up for the defensive deficiencies of that backcourt. And elite defenders are hard to find, and it's even harder to find elite defenders that can also space the floor at a reasonably consistent level to put around Luka and Kyrie. Finding those elite 3D guys, it's really rare in the NBA. There's a reason guys like that get paid millions and millions of dollars, like upwards of 10 to 15 mil, because they're incredibly valuable. They're some of the most valuable archetypes of players in the league today. They don't just grow on trees. So Dallas is going to have to find multiple of those to fill out this roster, as well as a high-level rim protector to have to fill out the bench with players in a similar mold. It just feels a lot to ask for this team in one single offseason. And even if they do somehow address all of those flaws, there's the Kyrie issue, because he is a free agent this upcoming offseason, and I would expect him to demand a lot of money. He's probably going to demand a 4-year max, because that's one of the biggest reasons why he requested a trade from Brooklyn, because they weren't willing to give him that final big contract. So I expect him to look for whoever is going to give it to him, and I don't expect him to have a huge market of suitors, but I'm sure outside of Dallas, there will be at least one team that's like, sure, we'll throw Kyrie a bag for a couple years. Somebody is going to get desperate in the offseason, so the Mavericks are going to have to throw him all that money. But that's even if Kyrie wants to stay, because Kyrie himself is very unpredictable, and this season has been an absolute disaster ever since he got there. Like I mentioned earlier, the fans are booing and Kyrie seems to be getting annoyed at them. They're not having any team success whatsoever. So who's to say Kyrie doesn't just walk in this offseason and try to go somewhere else? And if you're the Mavericks, you gave up a really valuable 2029 first-round pick, one of your best wing defenders in Dorian Finney-Smith, a solid backup guard in Spencer Dinwiddie for Kyrie, and he walks. You're then back at square one where Luka doesn't have a co-star and the team in general is just bad around him. How do you improve drastically from there? How do you bring in another co-star, because you do have some assets, but you kind of need those to fill out the roster? If Kyrie leaves, they're completely doomed. But theoretically, on the other side, you can lock Kyrie up to a 4-year max contract and tell Luka, okay, here you go. We got you your co-star. We'll build the pieces around you and see what happens. But what if this duo just doesn't work? I can say all I want that I'm optimistic and I could see it working with the right pieces, but there's a real chance that these two guys just wouldn't work together. And now you've got this pairing for like the next 4 years. You could have years of mediocrity after mediocrity. What if Kyrie requests another trade? You don't want to make Luka unhappy when it already appears that he really is unhappy in this moment itself. If it continues to get worse and worse, who knows what happens with this team? Something that's a bit of a bad omen for this duo is the fact that it's very rare in the NBA that we see a team win with their best two players being guards. The only recent example I can think of is probably the 2015 Golden State Warriors. Now, you can argue that Draymond Green was better than Clay or whatever, but let's just say that Steph and Clay were their best two players, so there is precedent for it happening. But those two guys had an elite defensive player of the year caliber guy eventually in Draymond Green next to him, and Clay himself was a high-level defender too. Kyrie and Luka don't have that player next to them, and neither of them are as good as a defender as Clay was back then. So while there's kind of precedent, it's not exactly a one-to-one comparison. Now, maybe somehow the Mavs can trade for a third star to be that high-level defender, that Draymond Green type guy next to them, but even still, I worry a lot about their defense individually. Maybe they could eventually trade Kyrie if they sign him to a long-term deal for another star, but we don't know what Kyrie's trade value is going to look like because he's such a wild card in many scenarios. It's just a whole mess. And this all goes on top of the fact that when you have a generational player like Luka Doncic, especially in this modern NBA where trade requests are more frequent than ever, you probably don't have a lot of time to put a really successful team around him before a lot of rumors start to circulate that maybe Luka wants out. And those have kind of already started to circulate, especially with the fact that he just went to a Western Conference Finals. He was a few wins away from making it to his first NBA Finals. He could be competing for MVPs right now, but he can't do any of that because the team just isn't very good. Once again, citing Tim McMahon from ESPN earlier today, he said that apparently the reason the Kyrie trade happened is that Luka Doncic was incredibly frustrated with how mediocre the squad was. And if he's frustrated with that, imagine if they go into next season, they're not good again with Kyrie Irving. This season they missed the playoffs. How frustrated is he going to get? And is there a real chance that by this time next year, it seems like Luka Doncic wants to play somewhere else? And of course, this is the nightmare scenario for Dallas. They got incredibly lucky getting a player like Luka Doncic in the draft. When they had the 5th overall pick, the fact that they were able to trade for him at the 3 spot, the fact that he was even available there at the 3 spot when the Hawks selected was a complete miracle. You cannot waste a player of this talent. But the way that it's going right now, it seems entirely possible that they're going to waste the first few years of Luka's career, and maybe eventually they're going to end up losing out on him entirely. With all that being said, I appreciate you watching. Make sure you leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of these videos. Go ahead and comment down below. Do you believe that this Mavericks team is screwed? Is there a way that they can fix this scenario? What would you do in the offseason if you were the Mavericks general manager? I appreciate you watching. I'll see y'all later. Real one, say back.